Le damos la bienvenida a nuestra doctora Helena Knyazeva, distinguida profesora e investigadora de Rusia, miembro del Consejo Académico Internacional de Multiversidad Mundo Real Edgar Morin, graduada de Física, Astronomía y Filosofía de la Universidad Pedagógica Estatal de Moscú. Se ha desempeñado en varias instituciones, entre las que sobresale el Instituto de Filosofía de Rusia, y especialista de reconocido prestigio internacional, autora de más de 400 trabajos científicos que incluyen 8 monografías y más de 150 artículos científicos. Le damos la bienvenida con un fuerte aplauso y se encuentra ella en su casa.
Dear friends, esteemed colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to participate in this great scientific event. I would like you to present some of my reflections on the complex thinking. Complex thinking is my field of research already during several decades, I would say 2 or even 3 decades. And I base my consideration of the complex thinking on my own research in complexity studies, first of all, and also on my collaboration with colleagues from other countries. Do we have translation? Okay. And what I have done in Russia in propagation and understanding of the complex thinking of Edgar Morin, I have translated one of the main works of Edgar Morin, La méthode, la nature de la nature, method, the nature of nature, in Russian. And Edgar Morin has great interest in the Russian culture, in the development of Russian culture, and visited several times Russia and Moscow, and presenting his views, his integrative views, to the Russian scientific community. Shall I continue? What do I mean by the integrative thinking? Integration, it's a kind of evolutionary holism, according to my view. We can combine different knowledge, the knowledge from different scientific disciplines, the applied science and fundamental science. It is called now translational science. Academic knowledge and educational strategies and methods of education. Okay. What is complex thinking according to my view? We need complex thinking in order to cope with the complexity of the world. It's quite obvious that we are living in the complex world, and this world is full of instability and crisis, of sophisticated interaction between elements and subsystems. which give highly complicated picture of behavior on the dynamical levels of organized whole. We can observe emergent event, and emergence is always connected with self-organization and complexity. We can observe short periods of crisis or points of instability, where we can choose a way of development between the ways which is proper to the complex system. Can we speak about the fate or about destiny, our personal destiny, destiny for our countries or several regions of the world? According to my view, I presented the view of the Russian school in complexity studies. No, we have no one destiny. We have alternatives of development. The future is open. If it would be a destiny, it would be a plural destinies for ourselves. That's why they can construct the desirable and preferable future. We have to know how we can use the complex thinking. And to use the complex thinking, we need complex epistemology. As Edgar Morin said, épistémologie complexe. Or I would say we need thinking in complexity. Thinking in complexity, it means to penetrate in complexity, but simultaneously not be distracted by it. Thinking in complexity is like dancing in the rain, which picks up the intentions and the rhythm of the rain and merging with it in one and indistinguishable nature. In this view, the subject and object of cognition form one and indivisible whole. So the complex thinking is our instrument to deal with complexity of the world we live in. Some important consequences from this. The controlling or managerial influences should be no less complex in order to effectively control or manage a complex systems or organization. This truth is old as the world. Like is known by like. Like cures, like in medicine. Like is controlled by like. What is complexity? Complexity is a multitude of elements, but multitude of elements is not the main thing. The main thing is the complexity of relations between these elements. So the complexity, the connection of two people, for example, may be more complex than a behavior of crowd of people. The connection is also of great significance to build complexity. Complex systems are open systems, and self-organization is connected with emergent properties. Emergence means the properties which can not be predicted by analyzing the available states of affairs in nature, society, or in our body or in our soul. Complex systems has a memory, and this is similar to our being, the human being. But memory is also peculiar for natural systems, for aging, for hurricanes, for example. Also memory. And there are loops of complexity, negative and positive. Negative loops was investigated in cybernetics, the complexity studies, the theory of self-organization and complex behavior of systems, which is developed in different countries and in such a sociological and philosophical way by Edgar Morin as well. We need to understand what is possible complexity. Positive feedback. Positive feedback gives us a flourishing complexity, an explosion of complexity, and the appearance of very complicated patterns of the behavior, structures of behavior. This is the main things. But to understand complexity, we need somehow to reduce complexity, because we cannot observe the behavior of each individual in the society, of each pattern in the natural system, the each self in our body, the each thought in our mental schemes. So we need to deal with complexity. We need somehow to reduce it, to have a method to deal with complexity in a scientific way. And there are 3 different approaches how we can deal with complexity. According to Hermann Haken, we can reveal parameters of order of complex systems. Parameters of order are several, not too many, macroscopic parameters which determine the behavior of elements of subsystems. To be more understandable, I would give you an example. For order parameter in social media is national tradition, religion, language. We cannot arbitrarily change the language. It's reality we live in. We have to use language. We have to follow the national tradition. We cannot change it. These are the order parameter for the description of social systems. And according to Haken, there is a slaving principle. So the order parameter are created by the behavior of elements, but then they slave the behavior of elements, because the individual have to obey these order parameters. And this is one of the methods how we can reduce complexity and cope with the complexity of the world. According to another view, the chemical physicist, which has a Russian origin, but he was Belgian, he proposed to the model of Bruselator and the diagrams of bifurcations. Diagrams of bifurcations. This is namely the nonlinear development of complex systems. So we can understand that the development goes from one bifurcation. There are two ways, but it can be more than two ways. And then we have a cascades of bifurcations. And that means that the future is radically open. We can now return to the same past, but only to the past which is similar to the past which we had. So if we go, for example, now in Russia to the pattern of power as it was in the Soviet Union, but our present communists are not the communists as they were then Russia was part of the Soviet Union. This is different. We cannot return to our past. This is also the way of how we deal with complexity. And this is the development of our Moscow School in Complexity Studies. And Sergei Kurdyumon, who was my teacher, he was applied mathematician, physicist, and applied mathematician. He proposed to develop the theory of complexity, which is named after the German professor Hermann Haken synergetics, as a theory of non-stationary dissipative structure that developed in blow-up regime. What does it mean, blow-up regime? It's a very fast growth of complexity of the system, avalanche-like growth, with non-linear positive feedback. And the way how we can deal the complexity, we can predict the purposes of evolution, in so to say, purposes, or the long distant trends of evolution, the channels of development, so to say, structure attractors of evolution. And it was not by me, but collaborators near the Sergei Kurdyumov. It was investigated. They were investigated by means of mathematical modeling, computer experiments. And these are the examples of structure attractors of evolution in three-dimensional space. There are some symmetry, and there are some breaks of symmetry, and there is a difference between the development of odd and even structures. Break the symmetry between the odd and symmetric structure, which is similar to the living organism. What can we say else about complexity? Complexity is it's impossible to give a precise definition of complexity. Striving for exact definitions of general concepts is rather often, even in exact sciences. But this is a thankless deal. Complexity is a multifaceted phenomenon in the universe. And it is connected with a large number of interacting elements and with intricate interactions between them. Complexity is connected with hierarchical principle of system organization and the principle which was discovered already in cybernetics, the principle of necessary variety of elements. So we can cultivate the variety of elements, preserve the variety of elements, to provide the system to develop in a stable and dynamical way, which we call sustainable development. According to Edgar Morin, who argues the problem in a true philosophical context, complexity is unitas multiplex. That is, unity of diversity and unity in diversity. We have to cultivate this diversity in our personal behavior, in financial behavior, for example. Don't put all eggs in one basket. In educational also, how to construct the better class for education, to separate good pupils from the weak one. No, it will weaken the system. The variety of pupils is the best one. Also, there are certain the most relevant sizes of individual of pupils in educational class. The best number is from 10 to 15. This is our investigation. The application of the complex thinking to education, to educational procedure. Now about the borders of complexity. Okay. And the construction of complexity. This is exactly some strategy which is relevant to the Russian thinking, to the thinking of the Russian philosophers and scientists. Because Russian culture, Russian philosophy always tried to combine not only rationality, but also irrational behavior. Not only logic, but also intuition. Not only pure theory, but also application. And so to say, the holistic perspective was very important for the Russian philosophy. And another thing which is peculiar to the Russian thinkers, that we cannot have only obey the regularities, the laws of behavior in nature or society, but we can have our own initiative to construct the reality, to control the time, the course of time. And this was the strategy of thinking of the Russian cosmism. Philosophers, and also natural scientists, like Tsiolkovsky, Vernadsky, Chizhevsky, starting from the Russian philosophy, Nikolai Fedorov. We can control the evolutionary paths of development. And that's why an individual, a human being, can be co-creator with God. God as the nature itself. Because we can explore another space in the universe. We can control the time. We can combine our own nature, our own attempts with those which is peculiar for the nature itself. Now about the boundaries of complexity, the borders of complexity. Complexity studies claims for universalism, and this is the challenge of complexity studies from the very beginning, from the development of systems thinking, cybernetics, and other previous fields from which complexity has started, modern complexity studies had started its development. So the complexity pretends for a certain kind of universalism in science. But it's well known that a theory which explains all explains nothing. Any scientific theory should be humble in its claims. To understand boundaries is a task of any science or scientific conception, and the modern complexity studies are certainly not exception to this rule. If a theory explains all, it explains nothing. If a medicine will heal all, it will heal nothing. There are no panacea. There are no panacea. So the complex thinking is no panacea. It's our own endeavor, our own deal to use complexity in complex thinking in a better way. And there are some difference between the complexity, complex thinking, and the natural philosophy of in the history of human thought. The natural philosophy, Naturphilosophie, starting from Aristotle, metaphysics, and then Giordano Bruno and Tommaso Campanella, natural philosophical studies in Renaissance, and then natural philosophy of the German philosophers, such as Leibniz, Schelling, or Hegel, builds a certain general picture of the world. As a rule, they are based their thinking on a certain first principles. This is a top-down approach. And these principles are constructed in speculative way. We can just sit down in a chair, smoking a cigarette, and will thinking what is happening in the nature, what is happening in the society, just in speculative way. But the complexity studies, the complex thinking we are dealing now is not a speculative philosophy. It's not an armchair philosophy. We need to study what is happening in nature itself, what is happening in society itself, in our soul or in our body, for example, because the immune systems of the human organism is the best example of self-organizing systems concerning the human body. So the complexity studies has strong empirical ground. And this is the difference between the modern complexity studies and the former speculative natural philosophy. So we are going, our approach is not as top-down, but bottom-up approach from the investigation of nature itself, or a society as an organism, as a certain organism, or our body and mind in a very complicated link, mind-body problem, and then go to some philosophical and methodological consequences. This is exactly the meta-scientific research level. By establishing complex thinking, we are going to the meta-scientific, meta-science level. Or, as Edgar Morin named it, it's transdisciplinarity. There are some nuances between interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. Transdisciplinarity is more real collaborations of scientists and specialists who know this very fragment of nature or society, for example. Collaboration of methodologists with cognitive psychologists, with specialists in education. And this is the creation of joint project is here of very importance for transdisciplinarity of science. Or we can name it after the French philosopher Félix Guattari, transversality, quer-thinking and go deeper to the understanding the basis of complex thinking in the nature itself, to understand how nature works, how our body works, how do they think, the patterns of complexity. So we can say that complexity studies are transdisciplinarity in actions, in action. The holistic character of complexity studies and complex thinking. The complex thinking can be elucidated as a kind of evolutionary thinking. It's connected with evolution. Evolution as we can describe it by using the understanding of evolution of the universe, evolutionary conception of universe, starting from Big Bang, cosmic evolution, the hypothesis of Alexander Friedman and Georgy Gamow in 20th century, the biological evolutionary theory starting from Darwin, but then connected with genetics, so to say, the synthetic theory of evolution in biology. And the third important component is exactly the theory of complex and self-organizing systems. So complex thinking is always an evolutionary thinking. Complex thinking is a holistic thinking because the properties of the whole are very important to understand the synergies between the, when we construct, for example, a teamwork, a synergy between different people, when a very good teamwork is constructed. Very important. And synergy means that 1 + 1 is more than 2. Synergy in family means that a man and a woman is more than, family is more than each individual in the family. So this is a holistic character, the holistic properties of well-organized, self-organized systems. Complex thinking, according to my view, is also non-linear thinking. What do I mean by non-linear thinking? Non-linearity is a way to understand the alternatives of evolution, the alternatives of development. There are no one and single path to this destiny, to this end. But all this, there are alternatives of development. And when we construct the mathematical models. They are nonlinear models, nonlinear equations. Nonlinear equations have not one, but several solutions. And these several solutions are mathematical representations of these alternatives of development of the natural or social systems. But this is not the all, because the nonlinear thinking is also presupposition that in development of these, of that complex systems, there are different periods, difference of fast growth, and then the periods of slowing down. So the fast growth, economic growth, and then recession and slowing down. The fast development of personal career, and then some long holidays, and go beneath the waves, and long rest. Also in creative activity, in artistic activity, there are some such cycles. In poetry, in painting, some season, then nothing can be done, no idea. And then someday will happen, and a poet will or a dramaturg or a writer will write the whole poem in one night. These are exactly the blowing our regime, explosion of creative activities. And this also non-linearity. Non-linearity is also, so to say, nested evolution. What does it mean by nested evolution? Nested evolution is fractal structure of evolution in space of time. Then several periods of time when there are some scale invariants and periods of short, for example, explosion may be observed in the lines of general lines of the development during the whole years. So there are different senses in this non-linearity. Non-linearity, to know how to think in non-linear way is to learn to think in a complex way. We shall use this complex thinking, such a complex thinking, to deal with the complexity in the world. And complex thinking is integrative thinking. So the complex studies can provide us with a strategic vision and a method. An ability to develop a method is peculiar to rather developed scientific theory. The theory of complexity helps us not only to understand how nature works, how society is organized, how our heads think, but also how to predict the development and skillfully to manage and to implement the most favorable scenarios of development in nature and society. Method, as Edgar Morin also said in introduction to his opus magnum method, is not something given once and for all. It's not at all something frozen forever. It is permanently developing knowledge. With the method, we are always in the process of motion, doing. We are in the process of doing. We are in the process of working. I would like to conclude my speech by citing the brilliant lines of Antonio Machado's poem, Caminando no hay camino, se hace el camino al andar. Thank you for your attention.
A nombre de la Unión de Universidades de América Latina y el Caribe y Multiversidad Mundo Edgar Morin, le entrego a la doctora Helena Knyazeva el siguiente reconocimiento por esta interesante ponencia que nos acaba de dar. Gracias. Le damos la bienvenida a nuestra doctora Helena Knyazeva, distinguida profesora e investigadora de Rusia, miembro del Consejo Académico Internacional de Multiversidad Mundo Edgar Morin, graduada de Física, Astronomía y Filosofía de la Universidad Pedagógica Estatal de Moscú. Se ha desempeñado en varias instituciones, entre las que sobresale el Instituto de Filosofía de Rusia, y especialista de reconocido prestigio internacional, autora de más de 400 trabajos científicos que incluyen 8 monografías y más de 150 artículos científicos. Le damos la bienvenida con un fuerte aplauso y se encuentra ella en su casa.
What do I mean by the integrative thinking? Integration, it's a kind of evolutionary holism, according to my view. We can combine different knowledge, the knowledge from different scientific disciplines, the applied science and fundamental science. It is called now translational science. Academic knowledge and educational strategies and methods of education. Okay. Dear friends, esteemed colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to participate in this great scientific event. I would like you to present some of my reflections on the complex thinking. Complex thinking is my field of research already during several decades, I would say 2 or even 3 decades.
Es la propagación del pensamiento complejo de Edgar Morin.
La méthode, la nature de la nature, method, the nature of nature in Russian. And Edgar Morin has great interest in the Russian culture,
del francés al ruso, y
culture, and visited
he estado
several times
estudiando la cultura
Russia and Moscow and presenting his views, his integrative views to the Russian scientific community. Shall I continue? And I base my consideration of the complex thinking on my own research in complexity studies, first of all, and also on my collaboration with colleagues from other countries. Do we have translation? Okay. And what I have done in Russia in propagation and understanding of the complex thinking of Edgar Morin,
Lo que he hecho en